Child sex trafficking. This is an issue most of us don't really want to think about. We don't want to think about children, not just, teenagers under the age of 18, but actual children, infants and toddlers and little girls being bought and sold and traded for sex, both on the internet and in real life. This is sadly a subject that many of us are not as aware of as we should be. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the reason why it has made popular media today, and that's because of a Wayfair child sex trafficking potential scandal. We're going to talk about if there's any truth behind it, what we should know, and more importantly, what can Christians do, you and I, what can we do about child sex trafficking today? That and more on this episode of Deconstructing the Culture. I am your host, Elisa Steele. Alrighty then, friends. Before we go ahead and jump right into today's very heavy content, I want to go ahead and make a quick correction. Last week in Good in the World, our story was the youngest surviving preemie in the world, born and survived miraculously and is going home. I accidentally said 20 weeks over and over. I think I said it actually 2 times, but either way, that was a mistake. I meant to say 21 weeks and 0 days. I think when I was reading it really quickly as I was doing the podcast episode, I was seeing 21 weeks, and then I was seeing 0 days, and then in my mind that just became 20 weeks. So I do apologize. That's something that I caught after I'd already published it. So youngest surviving preemie was born at 21 weeks, 0 days. That's my correction. All right. We're going to talk about child sex trafficking. This is an icky subject that needs to be addressed. If you've been part of the podcast family for even a minute, you know that I talk about this frequently, not just here on the podcast, at least a couple times a year. I usually make a special point to talk about this around the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl is one of the largest trafficking dates in the United States. I also live in Florida. Florida is, I believe, number 3 in human trafficking, which is devastating. And I believe number 2 is Texas. And I want to tell you just a little bit about human trafficking today, and then specifically what we can do as Christians, because it's one thing to bring up a massive issue and then we can feel overwhelmed and then think, okay, now I feel down. What am I supposed to do about this huge issue? I don't believe in giving problems to people and talking about problems unless I can also offer some kind of solution. So I'm going to give those to you today. That is the reason why you're here today, hopefully, not just so you can know that child sex trafficking exists, we know it exists, but to know what you and I can do about it. Now, before I go into that, I want to tell you very briefly, the first time I was introduced to human trafficking, I don't even know the name of the book, but I was probably, I want to say 13 or 14, and I don't know, I cannot remember the name of this book, but for some reason I found this older book that was published, I don't even know. I don't even remember. I just know it wasn't like a new book. It was a book that had been around for quite a while. And I found it on my parents' bookshelf. And I, being the inquisitive teenager that I was, I found lots of books that I probably don't know 100% if I should have been reading. But I was a very ferocious reader as a teenager. So I would find all kinds of adult books as well as child or more age-appropriate books. And I read about a lot of subjects from a very young age. Child sex trafficking was one of those. And I remember pointedly in this book, one of the main ways that the people in this book would help girls get out of the trafficking situations that they were in is they would take these big vans and they would put information on it, and they would go and help these girls get off the corner sometimes, and it would be a dashing situation where they knew the girl's pimp was literally just inside or just around the corner, and they had to get her in fast to get her out of this life and death situation. And I believe they were on the streets of LA. Again, this is fuzzy. This is over 10 years ago I read this book. But I remember telling my mom, I want to go to LA. I want to go to these terrible parts of the country, and I want to be part of this mission to rehabilitate girls out of sex trafficking. My mother, being the cautious, protective mother that she is, was immediately like, no, Elisa, I rescued you from way too much in your short span of life. My mom's gone through a lot of trauma. In her defense, she, at this point in her life, she'd already had 2 kids, escaped polygamy, and been held at gunpoint by the mafia in a foreign country. So she's gone through a lot of fear in her life, not to mention having her dad murdered when she was 9 years old. So my mom, already having gone through a lot of trauma, was immediately like, no, I'm here to keep my baby girl safe. So she told me, Elisa, that sounds terrifying. Then you would become a target and your kids would become a target. And here my mom is like talking about how risky this would be. Now she, later came around, but that was my first introduction to knowing that human trafficking, especially child sex trafficking, was real. Then later at 16 years old, I was at an Eagle Forum conference in Utah, and I heard Timothy Ballard speak for the first time. Timothy Ballard, also known as Tim Ballard, is the founder of Operation Underground Railroad. I'm going to talk more about him later. I saw for the first time undercover body images and camera of people who, from Operation Underground Railroad, would go undercover as pimps to purchase children for the most despicable sex acts on these tiny children. And I saw that undercover footage, and it was like a lightning bolt, refreshing me to remembering how horrifying it was when I first learned about human trafficking. And I remember finding Timothy after, who is a good friend of one of my mentors, and I got to talk to him for a bit, and I said, Tim, I want to do this. I want to get involved with your organization. This is what I want to do and whatever. And I'm talking to him a million miles a minute, and he's just like, how old are you? And I'm like, I'm 16. He's like, okay, let's talk in 2 years when you're 18. And so anyways, the road continued from there, but I don't tell you this to tell you like, oh, look at how great I am, whatever. Like, I'm not doing what Timothy Ballard is doing, quite frankly. I talk about it a few times a year, maybe a dozen times a year, and I hope I'm spreading awareness. But I talk to you about this so that you understand that for me, I thought everybody knew about human trafficking. I thought everybody knew about child sex trafficking. So it wasn't until I got older and started freely talking about human trafficking openly and with a lot of people, and then started talking about it from larger platforms, including the little medium-sized Instagram platform that I've got going on. It was only then that I started becoming more and more of an advocate for awareness around this issue, that I realized so many people are not aware of sex trafficking and human sex trafficking today. And I think it's not only a shame, but I think that as Christians and the Christian Western Church, I think we're failing our culture. Now, before I jump into that, I want to first just very briefly recap this Wayfair situation. Now, if you're not familiar with the Wayfair situation, just brief recap on that is basically it was pointed out by some individuals that cabinets and pillows were posted on Wayfair for sale for astronomically high prices, around like the $12,000 mark. $12,000 for an industrial cabinet or for a pillow. And then this, once people started looking into this more and more, it started looking not only, whoa, why is a cabinet $12,000? That seems kind of weird. That seems a little off. But then they started to notice that some of the names, they would list cabinets with female names or names, and some of those names would coincide or connect with various individuals, children who had been reported as missing. Now, there is no solid proof that these cabinets, no one also, some of the stuff, I think there was some misinformation. Some people were thinking, are they shipping girls? Are they shipping children or people inside of the cabinets? No, that's not really what people were saying or blowing the whistle on this. What people were blowing the whistle on this and saying this is alarming is not that they're shipping humans inside the cabinets, but that the cabinets being sold on Wayfair was a way of buying and selling and sending money for individuals being trafficked. Not necessarily that they're being shipped, obviously, maybe, definitely not in a pillow, but maybe not even in industrial cabinets. Now, and it was interesting because Wayfair originally, and there were some of these excuses that came out like, hey, well, they're industrial cabinets, like they're super hefty, but people were looking up industrial cabinets and being like, well, the highest price ones I'm seeing are like in the $700 to $800 mark, not $12,000. So that was really sketchy. And so this is just a developing story. We don't have solid information on this. We don't know for sure if Wayfair is taking part in, knowingly or unknowingly, in human trafficking. We don't know. And we won't know for a minute. As of right now, census has exploded in Wayfair's face. They say that they're removing those posts and that they're repricing those items. Although if they were accurately priced in the beginning, as was some of the excuse, then why are they repricing the item? It kind of seems a little sketchy. All we know right now is that there are some very sketchily priced high items for sale on Wayfair that are currently being removed. And it certainly looks extremely, extremely alarming. We don't have any solid proof, and there is no absolute concrete evidence that Wayfair is taking part in human trafficking. But that's not the point. The point is whether or not Wayfair is involved in human trafficking, knowingly or unknowingly. Human trafficking exists, and on a very, very large, broad scale. And it's alarming because many are unaware of this. I cannot tell you, and maybe you're one of these people, and I am not shaming you if you are one of them, because I don't think it's your fault. There are a lot of people who are desperately unaware of the mass magnitude of the issue of human trafficking and even child sex trafficking in today's world. The truth is there are over 2 million children being trafficked worldwide. And there are over 40 million, estimated over 40 million individuals, adults and children, being in the trafficking industry worldwide. Now, we can look at that number and get lost in that and be like, whoa, 2 million kids, that's a lot of kids. What's more alarming to me is what kind of demand, what kind of appetite has to exist in our world for there to be 2 million children for sale. And those are just the children. And then on top of the 2 million children for sale and the fact that a massive appetite has to exist for it, America, I believe, is the number one, or if not the number one, then one of the top consumers. I'm pretty sure, man, I should have checked this on OUR first, but I believe America is the number one consumer of children being trafficked. This is disgusting and despicable. And here's the thing, it's a cultural issue, okay? This is not something that our government can top down, just get rid of overnight. Now, obviously, our government is a huge part of stopping this and putting an end to it and putting the bad guys in jail or in prison or sentenced to I'm a fan of the death penalty in certain situations. But the government, obviously, yes, definitely has a place in keeping track of this, but this is also a cultural issue. And then also, I just want to point out something that is just despicable in my mind is that we're talking about racism in today's mainstream world right now, and it's very popular and socially acceptable to talk about racism and how it's a systemic problem. And our leftist narrative is pushing us to defund the police because of a few bad cops and the fact that we need maybe better training within our police officers or within their ranks. But if you defund the cops, who do you think is going to rescue these children when you see something wrong happening? Or when you see signs of human trafficking, who do you think is going to come in and rescue these kids? And then not only that, but when you defund those police, where do you think the traffickers are going to be most drawn to? They're going to be most drawn to the stupid leftist massive cities who are getting rid of their police, and they're going to be going there to conduct the trafficking operations because they know there's less accountability because we're defunding the cops. Don't you know we're getting rid of the bad guys in the law enforcement? So don't even give me this whole, there's a few bad apples who maybe have racist intentions, or even maybe a few bad apples who we claim have racist intentions, so therefore get rid of the entire system. No, we need the system, and we need our police officers for a bevy of reasons. And human trafficking is one of those. So as Andrew Breitbart would say when he was alive, politics are downstream of culture. So to me, this is not a political issue there where we're like, oh my goodness, it's the government's fault for not putting a stop to this. It's the government's fault for not cracking down on this harder. No, honey, it's our fault. It's the culture that is promoting this kind of appetite for children to be bought and sold, for anyone to be bought and sold. And I think, quite honestly, and this hurts me to say this, and I hesitate because this is a big thing to say, but the truth is the church is failing. The church is failing us, and we as Christians are failing within the church when we're not talking about this and we're not doing something about it. Not just talking, but acting. And the truth is the Christian church we're not supposed to be just floating along with the culture, which is what feels like we're doing right now. We're floating along with the culture and talking about race because it's socially acceptable right now, but we're not talking about the hardcore, massive, huge, impactful issues that are happening within our culture. We're not influencing the culture enough. Instead, we're letting the culture influence us. Right now, the culture is influencing the church as a body to talk about racism because that's what's culturally acceptable. But what about all the other issues that are less culturally acceptable that we're not talking about, that are fundamentally changing our culture? And child sex trafficking is one of those, okay? Now, here's the thing. The church, we're supposed to be teaching not only just, we're supposed to be standing outside the culture teaching timeless, biblical teachings and truth, but we're not supposed to be flowing along and being woke when it feels right, when it seems right, because that's what the culture calls for. And it kind of feels like what we're doing right now. We like to create these fluffy feel-good messages like Joel Osteen about how, if you think it and you say it and whatever, and God will make it come true, and then putting in a Bible verse here and there, usually out of context when it fits our message for the day. No, we need to talk about real meat and potato issues that are facing our culture daily and that's hurting Christians, hurting our culture, and hurting families daily. So why is it that it's so often that I find that so many people have never heard of the massive scale of human trafficking? I just don't get it. Why is it that for months now, since George Floyd, our culture, and including our churches, I'm seeing this in a lot of churches, a lot of American churches, we're talking about how supposedly racism is systemic and widespread in our country, but we're making minimal efforts to talk about the massive global crisis that we're having with human trafficking and sexual abuse. And you know what, and let's get real for a moment. There's probably a few racists in every church, okay? Because racist people do exist, and that's evil, and that's sin, and you know what should be called out for the sin, that evil, and the evil that it is. But I'm telling you right now, a Sunday message or even a few Sunday messages about racism isn't going to change that handful of sporadic, maybe people who have racist thoughts or feelings. It's not going to change their mind. But truly, honestly, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to make a lot of you super uncomfortable, and it makes me uncomfortable even to say it, but the truth is, there are a lot within a body of church, just statistically speaking, because of this being such a huge Western American issue right now, is there are a lot of men and women who are watching pornography, and they have no idea. They may or may not have any idea how pornography directly contributes to the massive issue of child sex trafficking in today's world. Because if America is the number one consumer of trafficked children, the church isn't immune to that. The church members, I should say. The church members, the people within our congregation, we're contributing to that more largely than we're contributing to the supposed systemic racism in our country. And you know what? So many Christians are unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, but unknowingly taking part in the human trafficking issue, and it needs to be addressed. This is a fundamental issue facing our country. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people think that porn doesn't hurt anyone. And I can tell you and tell you all about the harms of pornography. In fact, you can look at my 2 past episodes where I've talked about this in depth. Pornography kills love, and No Porn November. And I'll tell you all about the science and the facts behind pornography hurting individuals and psychologically, and how it acts like a drug on your brain. But it also directly fuels, like I said, human trafficking, in the way that much of what is out there, even if it looks consensual, even if it looks like 2 consenting adults together, much of the time, many of the time, that is not consensual. Whether it's posted as revenge porn, or whether it's posted as women who were being raped on camera, and that is all over. And there is case after case after case, especially in the largest pornography site in the world, Pornhub, case after case showing the clear-cut facts that there is a whole lot of trafficked porn on the internet, a ton of it, flooding it. And there's absolutely zero guarantee that the pornography that our church and our people in America are watching, there's no guarantee that that porn is consensual, and that directly fuels into human trafficking. Because today, human trafficking isn't just about buying and selling the physical human being. A lot of the human trafficking that you're seeing is you can make big O bucks, and a lot of the traffickers know this. They will film the disgusting acts that they're inflicting and the harm that they're inflicting on these men and women and children, and then put it on the internet. And that is how many of our church in America today is contributing to this problem, and many of us don't even know it. And you know what? And speaking of cultural issues that are deeply affecting our country and the church isn't speaking about, let's not even touch on the fact that abortion is a massive issue in the church, and much of the Christian church today is not talking about it. No, we save those conversations for, private one-on-one. We'll talk about racism for a long time because it's socially acceptable on main platform. But you know what? Why aren't we talking about these other issues, even abortion, as vehemently as we're addressing racism as a country right now? Because abortion is an issue the church is not immune from this issue either. In fact, the rates of abortion are the same within the church as outside of the church. That tells you that those are high rates. That's an issue right there that indicates that the church is ignoring this massive issue. And yet we focus on this supposed systematic racism that supposedly exists within our church walls. And we're not willing to address abortion just as vehemently when we know it's a problem within our church walls. Let's talk about the systematic killing of Christian babies within their Christian mothers' wombs before we spend months on an issue talking about racism. Okay? The church is cruising along like a cruise ship, and we need to realize we cannot just cruise along with our culture. Our culture is lost. Our culture is sick. Our culture is terribly, terribly, woefully involved itself in sin. And here we are, and if we as Christians within our Christian churches, if we don't wake up and realize, no, we cannot be a cruise ship anymore, we need to be a battleship, then we will be just as lost as the rest of our culture. And that is what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm afraid of. Because the truth is, I do blame the church for the fact that so many people are unaware that abortion is a sin, that abortion is killing. I do blame the church for the fact that we have such high rates of sexual immorality, whether that's homosexual behavior or even heterosexual couples sleeping together or living together before marriage, and yet we're still going to church. No big deal. No one confronts us. Nobody makes us uncomfortable at church. The truth is if a mainstream radical leftist today can go to church and feel really comfortable, that should worry you about our church, the health of our churches in America today. Here's the thing. We also need to talk about pornography. Pornography, like I said, directly fuels the human trafficking issue, but pornography is so openly becoming an issue that many states have declared it a public health crisis. And yet we're not talking about this all the time in church like we should. And we're not talking about the fact that these are crisis issues that are spiritually and physically and emotionally, and did I mention spiritually, killing Christians and destroying the nuclear family. And yet we're talking about racism still. Do you not see what I'm saying? The church is not doing its duty. We're flowing with culture right now and becoming of the world. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And right now it feels a whole lot like we're of the world, talking about what's socially acceptable and not talking about the heart and soul of the Christian church that is hurting and is bleeding and is ignorant. All right, so here's the thing. I told you I was going to give you some solutions of what we can do, and I'm going to get to that. Before I continue on, if you just want to remember to please subscribe, leave a review. If you're watching on YouTube right now, please click the notification bell. That's very important. And if you are on Apple iTunes, then go ahead and leave a 5-star review and leave a written review. That would be amazing. If you are on Instagram and you avidly follow me there, then actually you're going to notice I have had a very difficult time this last little while with Instagram shadow banning my posts, making it very difficult, making it so I can't use hashtags at all to bring more awareness. And also, if you don't regularly see my posts, which many of you have said you don't regularly see your posts coming up in your feed, then please go ahead, like a whole bunch of posts on my page, and it should notify Instagram that that's content you're actually interested in, and hopefully my posts actually start showing up in your feed more. So that's act number 1. Act number 2 is to go ahead on Instagram and set notifications for when I do post so that you don't miss those new posts. All right, now what can we, you and I, part of the Christian body, the body of Christ in the Christian church, what can you and I do about child trafficking? Because I'm telling you, the church is failing us. You and I are part of the church, and we're part of the failure if we're not doing something. So this is what you and I can do. These are action steps. Feel free to write them down. We can talk about sex trafficking, and we can freely, openly acknowledge it in an appropriate way, obviously, with our older children, teenagers. We can talk about it with friends and family and loved ones, and actually make this a topic of conversation we don't shy away from. That's important. We can also take a course on sex trafficking signs and how to identify the signs of human trafficking. This is very important. You can find a free course over at OUR, that's Operation Underground Railroad. Operation Underground Railroad is an amazing organization. Go ahead and take that course, because every one of us needs to know the signs of human trafficking, how to identify it, and how to put a stop to the problem. Next in line with that is ask your church, how are they and how can they start helping to spread awareness about human trafficking? What can your church do? How can they get involved? Can they teach maybe a group class going through an online course about how to spot the signs? That's something that some churches have done, and I applaud those churches for doing that, putting on, even in group studies where we can get together as members of the body of Christ to know how we can become more aware and put a stop to this in our communities, because it's happening in your community, whether you think you see it or not. Another is put the human trafficking hotline phone number in your phone on speed dial. That makes me sound old to say speed dial, or put it in your favorites. In my favorites list, I have my family, my husband's family, my midwife, because I'm giving birth soon, and the human trafficking hotline. Keep it in your phone. You need to be not only aware after taking your course, but also alert and ready when the time does come and you spot signs of human trafficking. Another huge one is if you are able to donate to places like OUR. There's also other ones, I think A1 and other amazing organizations that help put a stop to human trafficking. My favorite personally is Operation Underground Railroad. My husband and I have donated to them for years. Another is you need to learn about the harms of pornography and how that directly is fueling human trafficking today. It's very important. Start with the 2 episodes I mentioned that I did in podcast format. Pornography Kills Love and No Pornography November. Start with those 2 episodes just to get a glossary overview on how pornography is so harmful, and from there do more research. Go to, for instance, I highly recommend Fight the New Drug, fightthenewdrug.org, or FTNG or ND, the initials.org. Go look them up. Read the stats about pornography. Know how it affects the human brain and how pornography is an escalating addiction that can many times lead people to buying and selling human beings. This is very, very, very important. So learn about the harms of pornography and how that directly fuels human trafficking. And last but not least, this is a big one and it might make you cringe, but if you struggle with watching pornography, whether you have a strong addiction or something that you dabble in, stop watching porn. That's one of the number one things. I should have put this number one, but not everyone struggles with this, but enough. If you're watching pornography ever, stop watching pornography. That is a huge part of human trafficking. Just stop, cold turkey. And you know what? If you need help, if you've developed an addiction and you need help, get help. I highly recommend Fortify, a program that fights the new drug. Is created in partnership when I heard really, really good things about it. Go check out Fortify, get help, whatever it is. Maybe that's, Fortify, maybe that's your church, whatever it is. If you're watching pornography and you're having a hard time stopping, go get help. That is step number one. Before you do all those other steps, if you or someone you know watches pornography, whether it's constant or occasional, stop. Just stop. Okay? All right, moving on to movies. I thought I'd keep this applicable. We're going to talk about Operation Toussaint. Operation Toussaint is an incredible one. I actually picked this one specifically because it's on Amazon Prime. So if you are a Prime member, you can watch this for free. And it is about Tim Ballard. He actually left his post as a special agent for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And he went to form Operation Underground Railroad and to go undercover to rescue child sex trafficking victims that he couldn't save when bound by government restrictions. Joined him in a special forces team as they go undercover to Haiti to bring a ring of sex traffickers who bribed their way out of jail to justice. So that's actual real footage that OUR and Tim take, and they put together in a documentary style to talk about human trafficking, and so you can see how this is going down in other countries. Another one that I actually really, really loved, and I believe it was OUR's first documentary, is The Abolitionist. The Abolitionist came out in 2016. It's a documentary film that put together a mission orchestrated in Colombia, and it is mind-blowing. Warning, both of these documentaries are dark. They're dark because of the nature of the content. You were talking about children who are being bought and sold for unspeakable acts. So they are dark, and obviously that comes with, depending on who you're watching with, it needs to be age appropriate. But maybe, if you're a parent, you watch it first and then determine based on your teenager's age whether or not they are emotionally mature enough to watch this. But quite frankly, it is such a rampant issue in our culture. We can't not talk about this. We can't not talk about pornography with our kids. We also, and you'll hear this more when I talk about it in my other podcast episodes, but the average age of exposure for children to pornography is 9 years old. This is something that you cannot hide from. Your child will probably be exposed to pornography sooner than you talk to them about it, unless you're very, very, very aware and talk to your children about pornography as early as you can in an age appropriate way. All right. Good news, ending with good news this week, and I'm gonna do something unusual. Usually I tell you about the story. This week I'm actually gonna share a little bit more about the story. This is a story from Live Action News. I'm a huge supporter of Live Action. Go check them out if you're not familiar with them. But Live Action News reported and shared this story. So if you're a wrestling fan, you've undoubtedly heard of or familiar with Titus O'Neil. He's a former football player and WWE superstar, and he's been a fixture in the wrestling circuit for 10 years and has won several championships. Less familiar for many, though, is the story of his upbringing. O'Neil, whose real name is Thaddeus Bullard, was born to Daria Bullard when she was 11 years old. 11 yeers old, guys. So she got pregnant at 10 years old. In an interview with WWE, Bullard told her story, this is the mother, which is both heartbreaking and inspiring. Quote, "At the age of 10, I went to live with my mom," she began. "I had lived with my grandparents until that time, and at this time is when her boyfriend molested me. It was from this awful act of rape that O'Neil was conceived, and yet her mother did not offer her daughter the support she needed because she chose life. Bullard was repeatedly pressured by her mother to have an abortion, but she refused each time even at the tender age of 10 years old. This woman said, "No, Mom, I'm not having an abortion." She says, "Because I would not have an abortion, she brought me to South Florida, and I still wouldn't have one," Bullard said. "So then she put me out, and luckily I met friends to go live with." Despite Bullard's heroic bravery, the journey was not an easy one to walk. "I was scared, of course," she said. "I didn't tell my grandparents. I was feeling more ashamed and embarrassed, like it was my fault that it happened, until years later when I realized people telling me it wasn't my fault. I was just a child. And because I didn't speak out, nothing was done about it." "I know it was a struggle for her," O'Neill said. This is O'Neill, the son. "I didn't find out why the struggle was the way it was until I was 17 years old, being a product of sexual assault, and that is how I was brought into this world." Previously, O'Neill said he had a difficult relationship with his mother, but finding out the truth of her love for him and willingness to fight and give up so much to protect his right to life changed everything. "It was at that moment that I realized that my mother was a kid trying to raise kids," he said. All these years later, it was still hard for Bullard to talk about. She was robbed of her childhood and innocence. She explained that focusing on that fact upsets her too much. So instead, she tries to emphasize the good in her life instead, her son, and her own incredible strength of character. The article continues on. You can read more about this at Live Action, but the article continues on to talk about the fact that the mom, she didn't even graduate high school till after her oldest son graduated high school. And she really, truly did sacrifice. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is such an inspiring story of sacrifice, an inspiring source of realizing just how much trauma even a 10-year-old girl, 11-year-old girl can go through and survive, and good can come out of it, even when it feels like hell in the middle of it. And the thing is too, is this is a story that I bring up because so often people love to throw at me, especially on Instagram, "Well, Lisa, what about the 12-year-old girl who gets raped? You're gonna make her give birth? You're gonna make her have that child?" And the answer is no. Actually, we're going to allow her to give birth, because you know what? Birth is not the most traumatic thing that can happen. It's not. This little girl, this 10-year-old, was already so traumatized and so incredibly abused at her young, tender age. But the left wants to put her through more abuse. They want to put her through more abuse, both physically and emotionally and spiritually. And instead of giving birth, which is difficult but overcomable, women have been doing this for, all of humanity, giving birth to children. It is difficult at a tender age, but how much more difficult is the process of an abortion and the spiritual, emotional effects of killing your child without even fully understanding what you're doing at that age? You don't inflict more trauma upon a child who's already been traumatized and conceived a child through trauma. The answer is not to inflict more trauma and damage on her. And this is a beautiful story of a woman who was so strong that she was able to resist her mother's push for abortion at age 10, give birth to her son at age 11, and look at the legacy she has left, even though it was difficult, even though they had a difficult relationship. And this speaks to me because even though it is not the same situation, my mother was 17, a few months after turning 17 when she conceived me. It felt a lot like a child raising a child. My mom was a teenager, and if you look at it, my father was twice her age. In America, that's statutory rape. Even if you call it polygamous marriage, and by legal standards here, that's my mother at 17 being statutorily raped by someone more than twice her age. And so my mom had me really young, and I get it. We've gone through rocky periods because she did go through an immense learning curve and growing up curve because she was so young when she had me. But I want to tell you, life is always beautiful and life is always worth it. And it doesn't matter if we go through incredibly difficult trials in life. At the end of the day, we're made in God's image. We are image bearers, and our life has value and promise. And there's hope and redemption in life, but there isn't hope and redemption in abortion. I hope I left you with hopefully some information and also some knowledge and some tools to move forward today in the realm of human trafficking. I hope that if you have any other questions or suggestions, or maybe something you think I should add to my list of what you and I can do about child sex trafficking today, you would please email me. That's conservativebabes@gmail.com, or message me on Instagram. I will see your message and eventually reply, even if my inbox has hundreds of unopened messages right now. I'm getting to them. God bless you. God bless America. Hey there. Thank you so much for being a listener to the podcast. Thank you for subscribing and leaving those positive reviews. Thank you for your constant feedback. I literally can't tell you how awesome I think it is that you and I get to be part of this podcast family together. I was just telling a podcast listener the other day named Katie how flattered and just not just flattered, but honored, deeply honored I am that there are so many of you who tune in each and every week to listen to the podcast. I feel like I get to learn from you and hear your feedback and grow with you. And I just can't tell you how much it means to me. This podcast would not be here without you. I am honored that you are here every week to listen to what I have to say, because honestly, I don't get to share this on social media. Social media loves to ban me. They love to get rid of my posts and shadow ban my posts. They love to, take your advertising dollars, but suppress your posts at the same time. So it really is because of your help sharing this podcast that it has grown to the level and reach that it has. And I am so appreciative of that, and would love it if you continued to share this with your friends and family, especially with this sensitive topic and matter. Just if you would take a minute and share it with someone who maybe wants to know how they can get more involved with human trafficking and putting an end to that, or at least bringing awareness to it. So thank you again. God bless you. Thank you for being part of the podcast family.